Hello there guys, and welcome to the channel. Right, now let's try again. So unfortunately recently I have been super busy with moving houses, doing a ton of renovating, and I have not been able to upload as much or as good quality videos as I would like. However, a few days ago I did see this video from Ankit, who is a supporter of the channel and has a channel of his own. I will leave a link to the original of this video in the description. Go check him out, some very good stuff there. But this video should be quite eye-opening because I still see a lot of people absolutely sleeping on Mr. Fantastic and completely ignoring his capabilities. So in this video, we're going to be putting Void SIG 200 rank 3 6-star up against Mr. Fantastic. Now there is one caveat here where Mr. Fantastic is not awakened. And in reality, he does get a lot better if he's awakened, especially high SIG, because that significantly improves his combat power rate, lets him spam more special attacks, lets him get the debuffs up quicker and more effectively, and improves the uptime of the massive fury he can get after level 3. And in general, lets him do a lot more damage and lets him do everything that he does better and quicker. We're not even really going to be focusing on Mr. Fantastic's support champion capabilities via his synergies and his pre-fights, but those are two more arrows in his quiver that Void simply does not have. We're going to be taking a look at Mr. Fantastic as a champion in his own merits. There will be 10 different fights. First couple are going to be damage comparisons, and then there are going to be 8 fights in Act 6 and Act 7 in different critical scenarios where you would typically use these champions for, such as health reversion, power gain mitigation, and things like that. So the first fight is Captain Marvel movie version. Absolutely no synergies for either one of these folks. And keep in mind, Mr. Fantastic is unduped. It's a caveat that I'm going to be mentioning several times throughout the video, because that would in fact significantly improve his damage output. Now, neither of these champions are really known for their damage output, but one of them perhaps should. Fact of the matter is, neither one of them are the quickest ones in the game, however. But when push comes to shove, purely using these guys as brawlers and not for their utility, so far they have been relatively even in the first part of the fight, first half of the fight, and we're going to see Mr. Fantastic absolutely take it away from here. Now, obviously, there are several different inherent weaknesses and the strong sides of these champions that we will not be exploring. For instance, like Void is Incinerate immune, whereas Mr. Fantastic is not. However, Mr. Fantastic has already his fight done here, while Void is still catching up. At the same time, Mr. Fantastic can mitigate any and all incoming damage over time effects by up to 75%, which is actually really huge and much more helpful than many people think. So now that Void has caught up with the first fight, second fight is going to be these guys fully synergized up. And this is actually one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, about Mr. Fantastic, that he needs to have a full Fantastic Four team in order to be like really good champion. That's absolutely false. Obviously, he does get better with the full setup, but interestingly enough, well, so does Void. Ironically, we are using the Science Power Sting Mr. Fantastic's energy in order to increase the Void's damage. And I also actually think that Ankit should not have used that Power Sting synergy for Mr. Fantastic, but he should have brought in additional copy of Mr. Fantastic to gain a 30% attack boost. Because Mr. Fantastic does have several abilities that Void does not. And one of the most important ones is the combat power rate manipulation. Once you get Mr. Fantastic set up, opponents hardly ever throw special attacks, therefore those power stings kind of go unused for longer periods of time. Nonetheless, full synergy teams, Mr. Fantastic still finished it before Void. So with or without synergy teams, Mr. Fantastic, even unduped, going up against SIG 200 Void, does have higher damage output in generic situations. Now, perhaps the most important thing many people use either one of these champions for, and that is reversing regeneration. And you will notice in a very short moment that Mr. Fantastic is much quicker when it comes to reversing regeneration, mainly because he has access to a full set of debuffs immediately and only needs to land 1 level 2 in order to get to the second set. And obviously, whenever opponent uses special attack, that gives them another debuff, and he does revert regeneration much more quicker. And on the perhaps most important side, he does not rely on RNG, which is going to be a quite big aspect. Quite often when we start fights with Void, we pray for good RNG, we pray for those petrifies, especially in many power gain matchups, but at times also in heal reversal matchups. Because obviously that is the debuff that reverses most of the healing. And as we can see here, you still need to go through several cycles basically to get to a point where Mr. Fantastic was already absolute ages ago. So Mr. Fantastic is in fact quicker, more stable, more efficient heal reversal champion. So first 3 fights, all of them effectively go to Mr. Fantastic if we are keeping the scoreboard up. Second fight is against Doctor Strange with aspect of evolution, power struggle, and a bunch of other things. But this is to demonstrate purely the ability power gain manipulation, basically. Whereas Void does have the higher ceiling because he can reverse more power gain. Once he's fully built up, if you get 2 Fear of the Void, then you reverse opponent's power rate by 200%, or if you have 1 Fear of the Void and 2 Petrify, which is quite frequently the case. Mr. Fantastic as a 6-star at best can reverse power rate by 120%, which sounds inferior to Void. But in reality, mainly due to the fact that he starts reversing power rate at the very beginning of the fight, and the fact that there is absolutely no RNG involved, that gives him much more control. In fact, if we are watching the original voiceover from Ankit, that's the main thing he talks about here, where the fight always seemed much more in control with Mr. Fantastic for that reason, because RNG was never a factor, and it is active from the very beginning in the fight. That is the key aspect here. So even though Void has the higher ceiling for power rate reversal, Mr. Fantastic does it quicker and more efficiently, and he also finished out the fight faster here. Not by much, but still. So this point would also go to Mr. Fantastic, whether it is for fight control or the fight time itself. Now, this fight against Hyperion is going to let us demonstrate another aspect of that and how Mr. Fantastic in majority of the scenarios actually catches up to Void and overtakes him. And that is that Hyperion is a champion that does have power gain effects, but he also has his regular power gain from combat. Whereas Void does absolutely nothing to combat power rate, Mr. Fantastic does. And that in combination with his power reversal via Petrifies lets him increase his gap in the level of control you are able to exert in the fight. Now, on top of that, Mr. Fantastic also is one of the very few science champions that actually has access to Nullify and Taunt, which yet again pushes the difference here even further, where once you have kind of set up your debuffs, you can very easily nullify the power gain buffs or any other buffs that need to be nullified by spamming your level 1s, especially if your Mr. Fantastic is awakened and you have increased power rate. And then on top of that, obviously, Taunt further reduces opponent's attack and increases the chance of them throwing special attack. And again, when it comes to the fight duration, Mr. Fantastic again takes it home. Quick side note here very quickly that Mr. Fantastic or Void do not have their full synergy teams available here. It's only literally the Power Sting synergy in vast majority of the scenarios. So far, Mr. Fantastic also did better with power manipulation in Doctor Strange and Hyperion matchups, where it was strictly ability power rate, because Doctor Strange does not gain combat power rate, and against Hyperion, where you had both combined. Now, this fight is against Buffet, which is again a very specific form of heal reversal, but it's also in very stressful situation in a very kind of high-end scenario. So this fight is in 6.3, I believe. I think it's the Mysterio quest. where opponents do not go gentle, and we all know how troublesome that node can be. And on top of that, here opponents have significantly increased power rate by 200%, which is again something that Void does not have an answer for. Mr. Fantastic does. But Mr. Fantastic also beats out Void in this matchup for two reasons. One of them is purely kind of coincidental or accidental, and that is that Void's dash back, it makes it harder to trigger precision of your dexterity because he dashes back very kind of far away. And it's just one kind of small nuance to a character. It's not necessarily a con, but in situations where you do want to trigger dexterity, it can be quite annoying. And the second thing is that Mr. Fantastic can reverse more of the regeneration. He can get more debuffs on quicker and easier. And thanks to Despair Mastery, he reverses that heal in bigger chunks. And again, there's absolutely no RNG involved in this case as well. So that is, once again, quite helpful. So whereas Void is still finishing off the fight, Mr. Fantastic has taken it home already. So first 6 examples are in favor of Mr. Fantastic. And this was not the attempt to kind of like showcase every single place where Mr. Fantastic is better. That was just the results of objectively, let's go and try out some fights where these champions ought to be used for. Next up, however, we're going to get a bit different picture. And first we can see that this is against Masochism node, and it's bugged. Because Mr. Fantastic starts the fight with 3 debuffs, and 2 of them got shrugged off. It either should have been 1 or all 3 of them. There is absolutely no reason why only 2 of them would be shrugged off and 1 of them wouldn't. That being said, this is one of those situations where Void is significantly easier to use. Where with Mr. Fantastic, it's a lot harder to time everything perfectly because you do apply 3 debuffs at the same time if you do get your level 2. And on top of that, you do need to sneak in more heavy attacks, so you do need to make sure that you consistently keep triggering Masochism, whether it is convenient or it isn't. And in general, it's just much trickier kind of situation here than it is for Void. And Void has more control and more simplistic fight in itself. It was much easier to do this Void, according to this commentary. Sorry, much easier to do this fight with Void, according to this commentary, than it was with Mr. Fantastic in these circumstances. And that goes also kind of in the direction of one of the biggest weaknesses of Mr. Fantastic. Whereas you really want to be able to parry stun the opponent. If you can't, it makes a lot of fights significantly more difficult and some fights borderline impossible. You can always use your heavy attack to punish opponents' heavy attack or special attack, provided spacing allows for that, but that just adds another level of difficulty. You can see here that his debuffs also fell off, so he needs to finish his fight off, well, with a new set of debuffs, and Void's done. So this is where Void collapsed back. Under these scenarios where Mr. Fantastic is, I will remind you once again, unduped, because if he was duped, he would have better ability to spam more debuffs. Why increase power gain? So I do believe that the fight would be much, much more even, if not swing in favor of Mr. Fantastic if he was awakened. But in this scenario, Void does take it away as better champion for Masochism. I also have a feeling that if he was running Resonate Mastery, then the fight would be much more even as well. But nonetheless, Void takes this one. And this is one of the trickier lanes in 7.1. This is that vivified power alternator lane with increased whatever power gain and everything else that opponents have here. Now, there is help given to players for Science Champions where you can enervate the opponents, but you need to sacrifice a debuff for that. There are no damage modifiers in this fight, however. So we can see that in this fight, again, I suspect largely because Mr. Fantastic is not awakened, you will see Void take it away. Void is going to be more effective option in this fight. because he has more steady flow of debuffs. He does not necessarily need to get to his level 2s if you want further gameplay, because you spam your level 1s. Therefore, there is less chance of you being affected by the power alternator. And in general, Void just does a better job for this tricky fight, this tricky lane in particular, under the current circumstances. So this is another point for Void. But if you are keeping scores, then so far it's 6 points for Mr. Fantastic, 2 points for Void, and we do have 2 more of the fights left. However, at this point, I think it's already pretty clear that a lot of people are underestimating Mr. Fantastic. And as I mentioned before, obviously, each of the champions have more nuance to them, like Void has the Incinerate immunity, but at the same time, Mr. Fantastic has his staggers, Mr. Fantastic has his taunt, Mr. Fantastic has access to shock, and also ability to mitigate all damage over time effects, and plenty of other things. If you're talking about the general kit, what's left in those champions after their amazing abilities to deal with powers, power gains and regeneration and things like that, then I would say that, in my opinion, Mr. Fantastic has more that reaches further. But that doesn't change the fact that Mr. Fantastic, unfortunately, lost this fight challenge. Let's move on to the next one, however. And this is also a very interesting fight. This is a Punisher on a distract energy adoption ice lane with block erosion. That is a quest in 6.44, I believe, where Captain Marvel is the final boss. And here, Mr. Fantastic, again, is much better for this distract aspect of this lane and energy adoption lane. So first things first, Mr. Fantastic starts the fight with 3 debuffs active. And that also immediately allows him to do damage. Whereas Void actually has to build up to 3 debuffs. And that would be fair enough, but once he does, he builds up the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, and then all of them disappear, because they get combined into Fear of the Void, which is passive, which does not count for distract, and then you need to start all over. So when it comes strictly to dealing with distract under any and every circumstances, Mr. Fantastic is far superior, because he is able to do damage from the very first moment of the fight till the very, very end of it. That being said, there's another thing where Mr. Fantastic is significantly better for energy adoption ice and all of these energy adoption nodes in general, and that is his ability to reduce the incoming damage over time effect by 75% at its max. And we can see the difference where each of those ticks are ticking away. Void for 24, and Mr. Fantastic is getting ticked off for like 5 or 7 damage or something like that. And that is because of that ability. And obviously with these energy adoption nodes, it's not that big of a deal. But there are plenty of other matchups where it can be significantly helpful. For instance, if you're dealing with Morningstar, just to name one example, could be helpful against Hulkbuster as well, where shock is a thing. And I'm sure there are plenty more. Those are just a few on top of my head. But here we can see that Mr. Fantastic is practically done with the fight, and Void is just halfway through. So Mr. Fantastic is, in fact, way, way faster when it comes to doing the distract fights themselves. And Void is going to slug through the finish. And the last fight in this video is actually kind of worst case scenario, where obviously you will not use either one of these 2 champions against Elsa Bloodstone. But the idea is to see which one of them does worse in a bad type of scenario. Which one of them relies on the debuffs worse. Again, you would never really, if possible at all, use either one of these champions against Elsa Bloodstone or plenty of other skilled champions who shrug off debuffs. But the, again, entire point is to see which one of them can actually do better in a bad day, so to speak. And here the difference, again, is going to be quite huge. Even without any debuffs, just on their base or with like very few limited amount of debuffs, where all of them get shrugged off, Mr. Fantastic still runs away with more damage on his base, with more ability to inflict these debuffs. So we can see that at this point, Mr. Fantastic is at 50%, Void still has 13-12% to go. And the last 2 of these challenges, again, went to Mr. Fantastic in terms of speed and also fight control itself. Right, so that is it. That is these two champions combined. And it's very important to remember that this is not an attempt to diss Void. Void is still an amazing champion. And as showcased in this video, for every single one of those things that you would expect these champions to be good, you can use either one of them. It's going to be slightly better for one, slightly better for another, slightly worse for something else. But if you need somebody that reverses power, either one of them are likely going to do really good job. If you need somebody that reverses heal, either one of them are perfectly usable and perfectly good champions. That is not the goal of this video, to say all Void sucks, Mr. Fantastic is better. Not at all. Both of them are amazing champions with tons and tons of utility. However, I do sincerely hope that this video has in fact awakened some of you to the quality of Mr. Fantastic. We can see that even unduped, he did in fact outperform Void in vast majority of these showcase fights. And none of them were chosen to benefit Mr. Fantastic. None of them were chosen to kind of like, which fight Mr. Fantastic would be better at. All of them were based on what type of things these champions are expected to be good at. And it turns out that Mr. Fantastic, well, does better than Void in majority of the cases in everything you'd expect these science champions to be good at. Again, there are caveats to all of these things, as in like, Void is incinerate immune. Mr. Fantastic does rely much more on being able to stun the opponents. For any stun immune matchup, you'd likely use Void. But at the same time, Mr. Fantastic did in fact outperform Void in majority of the significant scenarios, in control and in the fight time. And he did that unawakened, going up against Sig 200 Void. And that is quite huge. That should be a quite huge revelation, because I still see every single day so many people absolutely sleeping on this guy. On top of that, as I said, so far in this video we just discussed Mr. Fantastic and his utilities. His heal reversal, his power reversal, his ability to mitigate damage or time effects. His, I don't know, there are plenty of other abilities that we didn't even touch about Mr. Fantastic and in his kit, because he really does have quite a lot going for him. And all of that, he did unawakened. And on top of all of that, he is in fact one of the best support champions in this game right now, with his pre-fights being incredibly helpful in plethora of different scenarios. And on top of that, we have the amazing synergies which he can use to enhance entire classes. Whether it's Science with Power Sting, whether it's Cosmic and Skill with extended buff duration, whether it's Mystic and Mutant with allowing them to save some more power from special attacks. All of those are very useful abilities, and we have seen showcased in plenty of other champion showcases. And Mr. Fantastic makes that possible. So for me personally, it leaves absolutely no doubt that Mr. Fantastic is in fact a top tier, top quality champion that is significant, that can outperform what you expect him to do. And he can build other champions up. He can help plenty of other champions. So I do hope that this video is exactly what you needed to realize the potential this stretchy rubber man holds in this game. All that being said, I want to reiterate that I don't think Void is a bad champion by any means. That if you have Void, you like Void, that's perfect. Void can still do all of those fights. Either one of them are valid options for a ton of different scenarios. But at the same time, I will say that if I have to pick one of them two, or which one I will rank, which is actually a situation where I am currently in. I have Sig 20 Void and I have Sig 20 Mr. Fantastic. I do have both of them as maxed out 5 stars, but the game is moving to the 6 stars. without a doubt, I will be ranking up Mr. Fantastic before I rank up Void. Guaranteed. And before I rank up many other champions in Science Loss. In fact, I think he's probably going to be my next ranker. Either way, I hope you guys found this video useful. If you did, hit that like button, hit that sub button. Don't forget to check out Ankit's original video. And again, my apologies for the lack of quality content in recent weeks. I'm moving on Saturday, so hopefully by end of next week, I should be back to normal. But till then, I'll be doing my best, well, to do what I do. Either way, see you guys. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about